What are we
Okay.
going to be talking about?
Well, that's a good question. I guess we can talk about, how basically everything was completely gutted by Google, and now we can start over on Discord. For now, until we figure out another way to do meeting rooms, or we can just keep advertising the Discord. Yes, we're in the casual room, even though that's not where we're normally going to be because we're testing out things. This is Deacon Joseph Swaden. Okay. Are you still there, Father? Father Enoch?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay.
Sure.
This is we're going to do Orthodox Apologetics live from the Discord, and we're going to be putting this up later. The questions room is up. Okay, so if people want to put in questions or concerns in any of the sections, they can, and we'll see it, and we will begin. We'll answer questions. So it's been an interesting couple of weeks. Not much has been going on. I'd say right recently. I did notice that there was some discussion, blew my mind. I guess they're going to approve, I saw this in an email, someone sent me an article that apparently, I guess Pope Francis approved Medjugorje visitations, which is insane.
Oh.
But,
I don't care about any of that.
Well, it's just a level of delusion. I mean, even...
I mean, did you see the thing with Una Voce with Mr. Bogle, who's the former head of Una Voce?
No, I missed
saying that Pope Francis has had supposedly regularized the SSPX and appointed Bishop Bernard Fillet to the Roman Rota.
Really?
Yeah, this Una Voce is a big Roman Catholic organization.
Oh yeah,
and the former head of it, John Bogle, who's like an Englishman who's the head of it, or was the former head until like last year or something, or 2 years ago, said that Francis had regularized the SSPX. And to be honest, it's probably not unlikely because I don't think he really cares.
It's like absolute anarchy over there.
So they have a lot of money too.
That's true. Yeah, they do.
The last of the French aristocracy basically gave Marcel Lefebvre and others like a lot of money, a lot of buildings, a lot of land. So, but anyway.
Interesting thing. I know that. What was I going to say? In October, there is a Roman Catholic apologist who wants to challenge. I guess he wanted to do a personal debate between me and him, and I was kind of hoping we'd put him on the show. But he wants to do like a formal debate. In any case, so that's in October, and that's going to be interesting. Kind of wish it was on our show, but I guess we can just cross-post it. But it's going to be on the Immaculate Conception, so I mean, I'm not really worried. Past that, yeah, as I mentioned before, even like my old, our old buddy Matt Slick his site's been down because of the Google thing. It just seems that this change from Hangouts to On Air is affecting a lot of people, and we're looking for different ways to do discussions. But we can do them here. We have voice connected.
Have you been following the latest discussions on the Orthodox Apologetics war zone?
I haven't. This in the past couple of days, not too much. I think I've commented once or twice. It's been a really busy couple of weeks for me, and it's probably going to be really busy. It's going to be busy for both of us actually for like, I don't know. It's looking like a month.
Well, that's why I made 3 extra admins so they could take care of things.
Yeah, and that's good. And here we have Timer, we have a couple of other people here, so we're good on admins. If that's at least if we die, you smart kids can take over. But God forbid. Do
we have any questions or anything?
Somebody just asked a question, and I just saw it, and I don't know where it went. Let me see if it's in the questions room. Okay, where is that coming from? Questions video? Okay, hold on. I'm clicking the things and it says, okay, I think it's in questions. Okay. Ignatius Brinchananov asks, I've read in a book that St. Tsar Nicholas was made head of all the Martinist lodges in Russia by a certain Papas, a.k.a. Gerard and Cause, so Does anyone know if this is actually true or just a way for secular historians to slander Nicholas? And I've tried looking for sources and can't find that info anywhere else besides the book. And Martinism, for all your information, is a break-off of Masonry. I'll be honest.
Is our Nicholas the first or Nicholas the second?
That's a good question. Not sure. It says Tsar Saint Nicholas. Ignatius, was that?
Tsar Saint
Nicholas the second. Okay, so Tsar Nicholas the second. I'll be honest with you. If you can only find one source for something, sometimes that's questionable, especially if it's a secondary source. So. I'd be suspicious.
Let's look at also hypothetically, even if what he says is in some sense true. Let's think about it. If a bunch of Masons declared the Tsar to be the head of the Masons, the Martinists, there could be some weird group that declared me to be the head of them, but I'm not part of them. Well, the Tsar is the head, but that doesn't mean the Tsar reciprocated.
Yeah, they can make him anything they want, but that doesn't actually mean he accepted it or was like, "Thank you, Masons," or anything like that. Okay, so that's a question for now. Again, it looks like this is the question section. So if you've got questions, throw them out there. We're here to answer them. We'll be doing this. This is a testing thing, so we'll go till about 10:30 at the most, and then.
I noticed that on the war zone, Eric Ybarra made this criticism about, are there any reliable secondary sources which confirm the Hildebrandian thesis? He says that's a key question.
Well, if they're secondary sources, they're less reliable than primary ones.
I know.
That's the point.
He means are there any people with academic credentials that agree?
The problem with this is that the problem with this argument is that it's kind of appealing to the existing secondary sources when, in this particular case, when we look at the primaries, they're wrong. And so the thing is, if you go with the assumption that the secondary sources are right, you're never going to find success when it comes to the Hildebrand thesis, and that's not how we found it. Because really, it kind of shows for itself, but you have to use underlying assumptions that they're making. Varum Fide asks, can there be vocal questions? Father, do you object?
You can be as vocal as you want.
I think he means turn on the thing.
Okay, sure, Al. Okay, sure, Al.
Okay. All right, Varum, hold on. We'll tell you. We'll unmute you. Hold on. Just I guess he can be unmuted. What's your question? Go for it.
Alright, so I kind of want to formalize this in words. So is the Decretum Gratiani, is it like heavily interpolated? Because I was checking the Patrologia Latina on Pope Gregory, Book 9, Epistle 12, the part where it says even Constantinople is subject to the Apostolic See, and I noticed a footnote there that said it was from the Decretum Gratiani.
Can you give us a link to that?
Alright.
Yeah, and again,
because the Gratian decretals are from what, the 12th or 13th
that's when
century?
the interpolations were really going on in full force. So it's not a question of whether Gratian was interpolated, it's a question of whether he was an interpolator himself.
What if I post a screenshot on here, because it will take me a while to find it.
You have a screenshot? Sure, go ahead.
It's fine. Right. But that would be an interesting find if the only source for that quote is the Decretum Gratiani. I mean, that's a bad sign.
That's actually interesting. Doing manuscript research into dating the epistles of St. Gregory, because he has 10 or 12 books of epistles.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about that. Where's the?
I mean, it literally. Why would St. Gregory be citing something from 6 centuries later?
I'm confused. I don't see anything. Where's
the? If you go to the questions section, there should be a
question concerns.
Yeah, well, if you look in voice, underneath it says questions and then casual. So the point is, here, hold on. What I'll do? Okay, you were just linked to it, so I'm going to send it to you again, and just click the view button when you see it, and that'll bring you into this section.
Okay.
Well, it's a poor argument, and certainly I wouldn't. If your best citation is from Gratian, I don't think you have much of an argument. Okay. But it's nice to see Eric using Latin sources. finally.
Concerning Constantinople, the church, it says.
Okay, I'm confused.
I'm confused. Is this from Saint? Is this from Saint Gregory's Epistle, or is this from Gratian's Decretals? He's quoting Saint Gregory's.
If you can get us a page of the full text, that would be helpful, just so we can kind of figure out what's happening here. Okay, that would be helpful, because that way we can look at the Latin. So if anyone has any questions,
because I have a text here, but I'm confused. Is this from the Patriarchal you're saying, or is this from a?
From the Patriarchal.
What book is this from?
But in any case, yeah.
I'll have to look it up.
Yeah,
I'll have to look it up.
Look it up, and we'll have an answer for you. It's but you may have found a possible, forced interpolation. They happen a lot after a certain point. And that's part of the difficulty of the Hildebrandian thesis, is because when you start pointing out interpolations, people start, it causes cognitive dissonance. If you're, supposedly a scholar, and then you somehow manage to miss that, St. Gregory didn't really say this, or this, or this, and someone else points it out, then it's like your degree feels worthless.
It's like
that people for a long time were trying to say that Gennadius of Massalia was teaching the Filioque in his book on ecclesiastical dogma, and then every secondary source says that. But then if you actually look at manuscript research, or you look at the digitized manuscript, or critical manuscript like from De Journal and things like that, they don't have a Filioque in any of the text. I think maybe A.E. Byrne is the only secondary source person. He died like 1910. Who maybe one of his texts says that the original does not have the Filioque in it. But how most, but look at Ciesinski and these other guys. All their books were like essentially secondary source books based upon secondary source books.
The only person who's even come close to coming, to where we are with the Hildebrand thesis and stuff like that is probably, from what I've seen, von Zernikoff. Because he does point out a lot of.
But von Zernikoff, he died in 1800 or something. 1700.
But it was something that was.
I think actually there are some 19th and 20th century historians that will admit that there was a distinct change that transpired in the Latin West between Hildebrand, Pope pre and post.
That's actually very common. But they will say it's because of the nature of Gregory's reforms, but they won't go into detail as to how. And so, they kind of admit to a Hildebrand thesis, but they don't want to admit to it completely for obviously sectarian reasons a lot of the time. They don't want to say, well, he basically invented a brand new church. So because if they said that, then it would be terrible. And they would, but we don't have that problem because we're not defending our doctorates or anything. So, in any case.
Okay, thank you, Vera.
We'll take a look at it. And let's see here. Do we know whose wedding it was in the Gospel of St. John? I read an Anglo-Saxon homily by Elfric which explained how it was St. John's wedding, and after the miracle of turning the water to wine, he decided not to marry and instead follow Christ. But there are other views on whose wedding it was, so is this a common view or a more eccentric one? That was possibly an innovation by Elfric that I read.
To me, some of that might just be something Alfric read in a previous text. To be honest, it's not. There's just not a lot of evidence for that. It's not a heretical opinion as far as I can tell.
In theory, it could be, but
to be honest, some of the things Alfric of Ensham says are kind of based upon Irish sources that, or something called the Blickling homilies and a few other texts. I don't know. To be honest, I don't even remember.
I don't know that it's even mentioned. It's not. I don't think it's mentioned in St. Chrysostom or St. Augustine. I think it was kind of. I think the miracle was more relevant than whose party it was. But if it was St. John, that is an interesting thing. Yeah, it is possible. Even then, they existed.
For example,
Irish apocryphal. And a lot of times, they might be from kind of late apocryphal
St.
traditions.
Patrick banishing the snakes out of Ireland.
And that's interesting.
And that's interesting because there are like there's something called the tripartite lives of St. Patrick.
3 lives of St.
Three
Patrick.
lives of St. Patrick.
They're not fundamentally.
Contradictory, but they have different little things. So.
Okay, Verum Fide says I have another question. So let's take it, and we're gonna keep taking questions for a little while. So let's do this. I guess you want to do vocal. Okay, hi Verum.
Alright, so do you subscribe to the 69 AD thesis or the 96 AD thesis to the dating of Clement?
The 69 AD thesis or the 96 AD thesis?
For the Epistle of St.
Clement?
I don't.
Yeah.
I personally
don't really have a strong opinion. Is there a specific reason that
why is it relevant?
The Epistle of St.
Clement was written to what? Wasn't it written to the Corinthians?
So, yeah.
Yeah.
But so
therefore, technically, wouldn't it have to have been written in the later 90s? I guess it'd have to be written after the apostles Peter and Paul had already been martyred.
Yeah.
Is there?
But there's a part where he. Sorry.
Go ahead.
There's a part where he writes about sacrifices still going on in the temple, although some scholars argue that the Greek verb is in the historic present, so he's talking about it in the past tense, whereas others say the historic present is talking about the present tense.
Well, the temple was destroyed in 70 AD. If you interpret it in a latter sense, that could still be groups of Jews trying to do some sort of remnant of temple worship, even though the temple was destroyed. Otherwise, it could be a reference to the past. Hello?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is that, and I don't know if this is, I suspect that it's probably a question related to the whole whether there was a monarchical episcopate at Rome. I don't doubt that there was a monarchical episcopate at Rome. I don't see a reason to. I think the theory that it was a bunch of presbyters and that bishops are a later invention is something that doesn't have any real sustained patristic support. That's just me. It's really stretching to try to push the apostolic fathers later and later in the hopes of saying that the episcopate was a separate development.
Well, I mean, if it was
written in the 90s, that would still be so close. That is essentially within the apostolic period because you have the Apostle John.
Well, it's like I mentioned that the Baptists started using a quote from St. Jerome, but they literally took out the biblical text from the quote and put an ellipsis so that you couldn't indicate that the bishops and the priests that the separation of bishops and priests was a development outside of Scripture, but still within the scriptural time frame. So, to me, it seems like when we start wondering whether or not, the question is, if St. Clement said it in 96, there was a monarchical episcopate at Rome. If he said it in 69, there was a monarchical episcopate at Rome. Either way, it doesn't matter. What about the Council of Jamnia? A lot of people dispute that one. Were Jews still trying to sacrifice before that? Jews are still trying to sacrifice now. Or do you find the reports of that council to be spurious? I don't know if y'all are familiar with Orthodox Judaism, but they still, sacrifice chickens and stuff. That's not like a thing that's stopped. Maybe they didn't do like...
They still have to put the blood on the door of those, don't they? Yeah.
That hasn't changed, so I don't know that... And Jews.
Didn't the when the revolt happened under what's his name the great liar who was called Bar Kokhba.
Okay.
Didn't he reconsecrate do like some kind of reconsecration for like the Temple Mount? They sacrifice a heifer, a red heifer.
Very possible. I didn't hear that, but it's very possible. They were obviously much better at breeding red heifers than they are now.
Red heifers. They have
all that stuff.
Well, but it takes them forever to find a decent red heifer.
Yeah.
And then let's see. And Ignatius said Jews did sacrifice Christian children in the Middle Ages. Wouldn't surprise me.
There's Kabbalistic support for that. For example, there's actually a book that was written in Israel, then translated into Italian by a professor at Tel Aviv, and then it was about Kabbalistic magic rites that called for blood from Gentile children and such, and there was a big outpour, a big controversy over it. So you cannot buy the book online. I don't even think you can. I think Amazon took it down. You used to be able to find it on Internet Archive PDF.
It's actually kind of terrifying how many books come out that shock the Israeli intelligentsia, and then they're banned here. Like there was another.
Well, it was actually a scholarly book. It was basically just a historical research of basically Hasidic Kabbalistic magical practices in the Middle Ages. And it mentioned that this, in fact, some of them called for taking blood from boy children and like baking it in such a way that it would become clean, so you could then eat it for magical practices, or you could make golem out of it. You know what a golem is,
right? Yeah.
You could do these things. Yeah, blood Passover, the Jews' European ritual. Ariel Toah. Yes, that's it.
MRJ mentioned that book in one of his podcasts. Well, that's good for him.
The book is there.
There was another book.
Whatever.
There was another book that was.
Now there actually is a saint, Orthodox saint from Belarus in the 13th century that was in fact killed by the local Jews. So I can't remember, Saint Michael of Belakritsa or something like that. There are a few of those saints and things like that did happen. I think what people forget is that up until the middle part of the Middle Ages, but especially in late antiquity and the very early part of the Middle Ages, when people dealt with Jews, they weren't like these kind of like Ashkenazi guys with glasses, and they could barely get around, and they were basically a lawyer suing people.
Ethnically Roman from an ethnic standpoint.
Oh no, I mean you're talking about people that were still heavily ethnically Middle Eastern, and they were just as violent as like the clannish Arabs were.
Well, I mean,
you know what I mean by that. They were much more. It was like dealing with a combination of Wahhabists. That's all I'm saying.
Well, the reason I beg to differ on this, and I'm going to, is because again, if you look at I hate to say it, Orthodox Spain, as much as it's been maligned for its treatment of the Jews, it still has saints like Julian of Toledo, who basically, was of a conversion.
Oh, no, but those are Sephardic Jews. That's not the Middle Eastern Jews.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. That experience. So.
Yeah, okay, all right. But I'm just saying that the Jews, as the Romans encountered the Romans, and then the Byzantines encountered them in the Middle East, like in Syria and Palestine, were much more violent than the Jews anywhere else. Like for example, there was a riot in the 590s in Antioch, because the Patriarch of Antioch, St. Anastasius, had converted a number of Jews, and so they rioted and they burned down portions of the city. Then they took Patriarch Anastasius, and when he refused to convert to Judaism, they basically disemboweled him and pulled his intestines out, and they strangled him on his intestines. And then they started attacking other cities, and then they tried them to Persians, and there was a big catastrophe. I'm just saying that the way that those people in the Middle East behaved was actually much more violent than you could get in other areas. Now that could be, frankly, because if you're in Spain to begin with, if you have Jewish communities in Spain,
they're not going to mess with you.
Yeah, exactly. They're not, because you're dealing with like Antioch. At one point, it had like 15% of the city, or 20% was Jewish at one point because of the Jew. I mean, you're dealing with large populations that could get out of control.
Yeah.
But if you're in Spain and it's like you got Jewish towns, and like if they start attacking Christians, then the king's going to send the army or something like that over to deal with them. And so they're simply not going to. If they're going to do something that's bad, they're going to try to do it in an underhanded means, or they're going to basically kidnap somebody and kill them. For example, in the Royal Frankish Annals, or was it the Mozarabic Chronicle? When the Muslims controlled Spain, the Jews then were basically allowed to do whatever they wanted,
that's the Mozarabic Chronicle.
They would pay the Moors just basically to look the other way, and that was why, in fact,
actually one of the things that actually caused, if you know how the Muslims took over in Spain, they used actually Jewish trade routes. Because of the fact that the Jews were still pissed off because of a recent Council of Toledo that forbade them from having Christian slaves. And so they actually kind of acted almost as spy outposts for the Muslims. So, you know,
because the slave trade was, the slave trade was really important to the Jews even in the even up into the the 19th century. So you know they had Jews oftentimes would get back at people.
Well, what was the story about the you know, and I want to get to Timer's diagram shortly, actually.
Yeah. Okay.
But what was the there was that one, it's the Saint Savior icon where the Jews stabbed the icon and ended up converting.
Oh yes, that's taught. If you look in the Acts of the Seventh Ecumenical Council in Beirut, it talks about in the 4th century, maybe the 5th century in Beirut. There was a man who had an icon. One account says it was like a fresco.
Yeah, I thought he saw an icon.
You
know, yeah, I thought he was passing one.
What happened is, so there was a guy who had a house in Beirut, and this is what the Seventh Ecumenical Council recalls this story. And he, sold the house, and he was Christian. And as he left the house, he forgot to take the icon of the crucifixion. They were on like a shelf. Okay. The Jewish guy buys the house. All right.
Sees the cross.
And yeah. And so one day, he has some of his other Jewish friends over, and they see this, and they notice, I guess, they had never noticed before, but they notice the icon of the crucifixion. It's the kind of the famous icon people have, the crucifixion with Christ, Our Lady, Saint Mary Magdalene, the Virgin, and the soldier. Yeah, exactly. And they began to mock this. One Jew said, how do you have this icon up here? You're supposed to be Jewish, and you got this icon of the deceiver, they call it.
Yeah, and he takes out a knife, so he decides to stab the icon.
Yeah, and so they basically begin to attack the image, and to jeer at it, spit at it, and do all the things that was done to our Lord in his earthly ministry. And blood began to pour out of the icon, and they were extremely terrified.
Well, I heard it was he stabbed the icon and then blood came out.
So that's what happened. That's what I said.
Oh,
and so what happened is that some of the Jewish elders came there, and I guess they were impressed by it, and so eventually the local bishop found out of Beirut, and people were healed, blind people and deaf and lame people were healed, and the whole synagogue was baptized, and the synagogue was consecrated into a church.
Yep. That's very true.
So that's like now there's another. Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
How you find in Evagrius Scholasticus, and it's also recounted also in St. Gregory of Tours about how there was a Jewish glassmaker, I believe, or a blacksmith maybe, and his son was like 5 years old, and his son would go off every day to school, one of the schools in Constantinople. And he was like the only Jewish boy in the school. Okay, it was very unusual, but he had the money to send him there, I guess. Okay, and what happened is there was a custom in Hagia Sophia that they were having liturgy every day in Hagia Sophia. Okay, of course the Sunday liturgy and during the 5th, this is just for people who don't understand. In the 500s in Constantinople, up until like the 11th century or so, the main Sunday liturgy is actually the liturgy of Saint Basil. And the weekday liturgies, of course, outside of Lent and such, was actually the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, because it was like considered a shorter liturgy. Anyway, that changed over time. But so what happened is that after liturgy was over, at Hagia Sophia, sometimes they would have a lot of leftover communion, holy gifts. All right, and they would bring school children in who are very young, like 5 or 4 years old. And they basically would feed them, give them Holy Communion. Because I guess the concept was that they're so young children, they're innocent, they don't have the age of reason. They're very pure, they've been baptized, all these other things. So you can give them communion. Yes. So they can be fed the holy gifts along with the deacons and everything. All right, that was what actually Evagrius Scholasticus said happened.
That's actually really smart.
So what happened is that this Jewish boy was just given communion, took the body and blood of the Lord by accident. All right, and they didn't know because the school was like, well, they didn't have a reason to think he was not Christian, if you know what I mean. That was what was going on. So the boy comes home. Okay, to ask him, what did you do? How did things go? And he began to say that, there was this wonderful, things that happened, and I believe I'm going to become a Christian now because of, I'm not sure if he said I was going to become. He was basically talking about how he was given, the bread the Christians eat and things like that. All right. And the father was so outraged. But he says, you become a traitor. And so he took his son, and he said, I'm going to kill you. And he basically threw him into the furnace, the glass furnace, and he closed the door. And then the mother came in, and she was like weeping and crying, and the father was like, he was really hard-hearted, and so the mother went through the city crying and lamenting and asking somebody to come help that her husband had murdered her son. So all these men in the local neighborhood, they rushed in, and so they restrained the father, and they opened up the furnace. They were expecting basically, to find a charred body or ashes or whatever. But the boy was actually alive, and he crawled out. They got him out, and even though there was massive flames coming, it was a miracle. And they asked him, what did he see? How did this happen? And he said, and the boy said, the Jewish boy, was that when my father threw me in the furnace, the lady I saw in the church, painted on the church, who had the baby in her lap, that same lady came to me in the furnace, and she put her cloak over me, or cover, and said everything would be all right. So obviously it was the Theotokos who came and protected him. And so the boy and his mother were rescued, by the imperial magistrates. They later were baptized. And the father, there was two accounts. One says the father was thrown into the furnace. Another says he was actually impaled.
Wow, that's sad.
But he was executed.
What an abusive dad. Anyway, that's really sad. But
it did, and that is the bad point. But the problem is that you got to think, he had no remorse. I mean, his son just told him he took communion by accident. I mean, he was just a young boy, but he still. My point is that was how fanatical some of the Jews were and how they would behave.
Yeah, and we'll get to Ignatius's comment about the Jews in the Holy Land now, because that's
let's do what's the diagram. What's
the
this
diagram?
Is
it's pretty interesting, because I saw this a couple of days back, and what that is basically is he was Timer was pointing out. I think he actually was pointing out to a Monophysite, pointing out that Monophysites have to create an extra step in terms of developing the person of Christ. You have the one person. Now, if you can see in the diagram, there's divine nature, there's human nature, but then you have to combine them into the single nature. Whether you go mono or mia, it doesn't matter. But the divine nature and human nature aren't enough. You have to actually create another nature rather than simply admit to a hypostatic union. And so, the point is...
Okay, so I see one box says DN, that's divine nature. Another says HN, that's human nature. And what's the thing to the...
Right next to it, that thing surrounding it is the one nature, the combined nature, which is what you have to hold to as a Monophysite or a Miaphysite, and then you get to one person. And so, yeah, Verum Fidei is pointing out how it looks in text, that there has to be another step in between to understand their position, and that's not supportable, I think, in the majority of the fathers. So that's definitely, it's a great diagram. If it brings any people to Orthodoxy, keep using it. I mean, I fully endorse. Maybe make it neater, like draw it in, like, I don't know, paint or something. But in any case, Verums is very
Ignatius mentions the attack on the Mont Sabre monastery by the Jewish settlers.
Yeah, that happened earlier this year.
That happened during Nativity.
Well, one of the things that I don't want to do, and this is something that bothers me, is that the conservatives, in America, they love defending the Jews with their dispensationalism. The liberals love defending the poor innocent Muslims. I've said it on the show, I'm pretty sure a few times. Life for Christians in the Holy Land sucks. Everybody hates them. That's how it works. The Jews, the Muslims, everyone treats them like garbage. That's how it works. So there's no, what's it called? I don't feel for the Jews or the Muslims. And I don't take sources that sympathize with either side. I feel for the Christians, whose life has been perpetually horrible for the past few hundred years. and it's been a lot worse in the past 100. So yeah, it's hard for me. I don't sympathize with. It's not like okay, get the Jews out. Hamas is in charge. Yeah, they still mistreat the Christians. So the point is, it's like it's a difficulty. But
Hamas was actually created by the Israeli state to counteract the PLO.
We could argue. I'm not even going to argue that. The point I'm trying to make is that even the PLO didn't treat them well either.
I don't know. The PLO actually had Christians on its board.
Then that would mean that the PLO was part of that modernist kind of wing, the more democratic wing, like exists in Lebanon.
I'm not endorsing it, but I'm saying technically the PLO was trying to be just like an Arab nationalist.
Yeah.
But what happened is that it was trying to hold a center, but I don't think. But it was actually it was considered too dangerous and partially by the Israelis for that reason because they wanted to have radical. They thought it was easier to deal with radicalized kind of Wahhabi type groups.
Well, they obviously have been very successful with those types over the centuries, so why not? The point is,
Bayram Fidier says the Old Calendarists, Orthodox, and the Holy Land. There are how many true Orthodox are there in the Holy Land? I think there's probably a few churches.
There's probably each one has scattered individual parishes. To be quite honest, there's not no real synodical presence. And a part of that is, I hate to say it, a lot of it's been the whole issue with Patriarch Irenaeus. And they're not even Old Calendars because everyone there is on the Old Calendar. But, the point is that at least, because first, with the death of Patriarch Diodorus, you had Irenaeus and you had Theophilus, but the point
I'll be right back, Father. I'll be right back.
The point is that Irenaeus, for whatever reason, obviously the corrupt land deals, so on and so forth, decided that he would then place his lots with Old Calendarists. So that was part of the reason why, perhaps his motivation wasn't the best, but at the same time the product was the same, in that you had an Old Calendarist or traditional Orthodox Patriarch, however unwilling that may be. So that's part of the reason why he kind of did, it kind of, you don't see too much of an Old Calendarist presence because there doesn't need to be if someone's confessing correctly. Let's continue on and see here. Timur and Ignatius are talking about the diagram, and I agree, and I think that it's kind of sad that I think it's kind of sad that you see the Miaphysites, if we want to be politically correct, are so desperate to say that our theology is the same that they're willing to throw out their own fathers. And this is one of the things that, we at least respected Severin Zealot for. He wasn't willing to throw out Severus and Dioscorus and so on and so forth. Because...
Okay, I'm back.
And so, then let's see here, and I'm reading a fascinating discussion in the chat there, which you can all see in the video, but in any case, if anyone has more questions in the chat, etc., feel free. There's always room. And so we're in the questions section of Voice, so that's where you can go if you want to write something. But past that, let's see here. It's 10:05. We'll go for another 25 minutes or so, and then we'll upload this to YouTube. And so it'll be our first Discord version of the Orthodox Apologetics War Room Warzone, and we're going to have to figure out how to announce things and put them up too. So we'll see.
Mm-hmm.
Does the Verm Friday asks, does the 1080 Brixen Synod conveyed by Henry V fourth support the Hildebrandian thesis? Yes, it's central to it. They deposed Hildebrand and they made a new pope. So yeah.
Well, technically, Weaver de Ravenna did become Clement III in 1084, though.
Well, yeah, but the Brixen Synod
all Brixen did was simply depose Hildebrand.
Yeah, but they had to have a pope, so that's why they elected, Clement III afterwards. And that's where you see the real split occur in that period because of the fact that you now had two rival churches. And didn't they also kick Hildebrand out of Rome at that point?
Yeah, he was in fact expelled at one point, and Weaver Clement III controlled it. Now, it's interesting because people who say there was there are some people who say there was really no difference between Hildebrand and Clement III / Weaver de Ravenna.
Yeah,
but the problem with that is Weber of Ravenna or Clement III acknowledged that a pope could actually be deposed. That's how he got to be a pope to begin with. If you acknowledge that a council of bishops of metropolitans, whether it be an extraordinary local, extraordinary council or even an ecumenical council, can actually depose a pope at form, then you've already, whatever else you believe, you're already much closer to coming out of the repairing the great schism. Obviously, assuming he was an Orthodox. I mean, there's a lot of sources have been destroyed from that period, so we're going on basically bits and pieces of information we have.
But it's still a lot of bits and pieces. I mean, you can still see that, I think it was, Clement III, or Weber at the time, withdrew from the synod at almost the exact same time the Dictatus Papae was written, and it was supposedly...
well, remember, he was invited to he had originally been a supporter of Cadalus, who was in fact called the anti-pope Honorius II. And he had been Archbishop of Ravenna, as I recall. Let me try to remember. What happened is that Cadalus, or Parma, also known as Honorius II, died. And when Hildebrand was elected, there was some sort of Archbishop of Ravenna. Weber was invited to the Lenten Synod, like in the 1070s or something like that. And something transpired at the Lenten Synod. We're not exactly sure in Rome. But Weber of Ravenna never came back to another Lenten Synod.
Yeah.
Him an implacable foe of Hildebrand at that point. He had already been inimical to him. He had like a short reconciliation, supposedly, and then he went back after this period to being against him. Now it's interesting that even Peter Damian, who is not an Orthodox saint, by the way, I'm not endorsing him, he in fact became very negative and soured on Hildebrand over time. Because he simply felt he was lying. He called him the Holy Satan.
Well, it's worth noting that Clement III did try at least to negotiate with the Eastern bishops that were in his area. He did try to reach them.
Yes. Oh no, that's true. And he did send letters to the bishops, the Byzantine bishops in the Balkans, and such. And they were so But now it's interesting also that England, for example, did not even never recognized Hildebrand. Interestingly, but that's another story.
Well, that's how the whole Anselm thing starts, and Anselm of Lucca.
I think Anselm was the one who kind of convinced them to recognize the Hildebrandian line.
Well, he didn't really.
Because what happened was that during Lanfranc's time as Archbishop of Canterbury and under the Norman kings, the Normans and the Anglo-Norman bishops had grown really agitated at kind of the so-called Reformed papacy time period.
Well, yeah.
So they basically.
But I'm saying.
Because remember what happened is, what's his name? Who was the cardinal who caused all the problems in Constantinople? Humber. He also went to England and he tried to anathematize William the Conqueror, who probably was a pretty bad guy. But wherever Humbert went, he kind of destroyed situations and created some sort of a schism or some sort of a breach. But remember, it was Humbert and Hildebrand. They were the ones behind Leo IX. They ran Leo IX, and then the successive popes.
And now it's worth noting that when I bring up Anselm, it's not like he just randomly came and said, "I support the Hildebrand line." He was actually in open conflict with the king at that point, because he refused.
Yes, William II.
So let's see here. Digital, who's been very active on the War Room Discord, asks, "What Christology do you teach, and what's the historical evidence for it?" We teach the Christology of the 7 ecumenical councils, and the evidence for it is the 7 ecumenical councils. See, now he writes, "Christological discourse between Orthodox or Eastern theology, i.e. the theology of the Eastern Orthodox churches, has been shaped by the 5th century by the doctrine of Chalcedon." That was the entire church, outside of the Monophysites or people that were labeled.
Remember, technically at Chalcedon, he had all the Egyptian bishops, and they accepted it initially. It was only when they came back to Egypt they were terrorized by Dioscorus, who was technically the Pope.
And so the point is, you can basically determine, if you want to say gotta hear both sides to the Orthodox and the heretics each time, then yeah, sure, it looks divided. But the reality is that the church moved through those councils, and that's exactly how it always worked. Let's see here. And so, let's see, I'm reading some...
Well, there was a Monophysite saint who promoted reincarnation.
Wow, that's crazy.
Okay, what do you know about this guy, Ignatius? interesting to get any more information about that. Was he like an Indian Martoma Monophysite or something like that?
Type, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And then you have even like Lamza, I think the translator of the Peshitta ended up like holding to some strange beliefs. At least his followers did. So, in any case, let's see here. Yep. Okay, he lived in the 19th century and was Indian. So, all right. So, if there are more questions, more discussions, yeah, I mean, seems like a pretty comfortable sort of platform to use, so we can continue making videos. It seems to work okay. We just have to tell people about the Discord channel if they want to ask the questions. Let's see. Digital writes, Eastern Orthodoxy maintains the divinity of the icon of Christ. What?
Hold on.
No. That is the argument that name worshippers use. Digital Eastern Orthodoxy maintains the divinity of the icon of Christ. There is no essential distinction between the icon of Christ and Christ himself. Behind the icon of Christ, indeed behind all icons, is the essence of the person. That's incorrect. If you look in St. John of Damascus and how he refers to the icons in his iconographic arguments, veneration that is given to the icon passes on to the prototype. That does not mean it is the prototype. So that is incorrect. Just clarifying that for you, Digital. There is a distinction between the icon of Christ and Christ himself. Otherwise, that would mean people could paint Christ, and that would be insane. Let's see here.
Is this guy presuming?
Is this guy like telling us what we believe? Even?
Yeah, I don't think he knows. He claims to be a searcher. It seems like sometimes he wants an argument, and we'll give him one. But the point is, it's not going to be based on false premises.
Orthodoxy
does not maintain the divinity of the icon of Christ.
I don't know who told you.
I don't know who told you that.
Probably a name worshiper. But anyway,
they're not Orthodox.
Exactly,
so. Okay.
Let's see here. And we're going to be, I guess we'll be here for what, another 15 minutes or so?
Yeah, I guess.
No.
Yeah, I guess.
I haven't done this in a while. It's just a whole different format. Good to see a lot of the people from YouTube are here. So we just got to make it go, get more people on the Discord. And, for now, that seems to be the best way to go. But,
Any feedback from our last video?
I deleted it, Father.
Oh no, from the last one.
Oh no, from the last one we did together.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, we get comments all the time. I think people are just wondering because there's really, in practice, been no new videos for like 2 weeks. So
Digital says, what is the icon of Christ? The icon of Christ is a painted image of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, it's an icon. It's literally an icon of Christ. The image, icon means image in Greek.
Yes.
So if there are any other questions, concerns, want to argue the questions, just put them right here in questions, and we will discuss them. Let's see here. No, Ignatius, it's not at all like that. There were often, I guess you could say, there were often territorial disputes between non-Orthodox and Orthodox. So yeah. So there were, Chalcedonian Orthodox.
I should also point out that here's a question. When did the dating of Saint Isaac the Syrian get to be into the late 600s? Because there are some people who say that that's actually a more modern dating, that the earlier dating was actually Saint Isaac died around the year 600 or 610.
And this gives
rise to the concept of that is the Isaac the Syrian who they're talking about who died around the year 700, is that the same as the Orthodox Isaac the Syrian who died around the year 610 or 600?
Because I notice
a lot of that's an important discussion to have. So.
But in any case, I like this setup. It's not that bad, to be quite honest. I mean, I feel bad for people on the YouTube that'll have to I don't feel bad. They just have to come to our Discord channel so they can catch us live, and we can just do this every Monday or Tuesday night like we've always done, and just keep on going. But
okay, maybe
Okay, maybe we should look at some of the discussions that we've had recently on the Apologetics
I mean,
forum.
I can't do that because I have this. This is a screencast, so it's recording the Discord. But if you want to pull some out, yeah.
Oh, I see. There is that recent article by Hierotheos of Naphtakatos. I don't know if you read that, Father Joseph. Which I think is important because he was.
A lot of people are thinking they're taking the ecclesiological arguments that true Orthodox have with World Orthodox and trying to pigeonhole them into the fight between Constantinople and Moscow, and it doesn't quite work.
Especially considering the fact that Moscow has not meant the Moscow Patriarchate has officially, as far as I can tell, officially not given ecumenism as any reason for breaking up the family.
It's all been about the territory.
It's all been about the territory in the Ukraine.
Absolutely, it's a political.
There
are Moscow Patriarchate people that have mentioned ecumenism as supposedly the background,
that might be their motivation, but that's not reality.
That's not the motivation for Patriarch Kirill. I mean, if he's doing the joint Havana Declaration and all this other stuff. I think what's happened is you have people in the Moscow Patriarchate who are trying to, steer things into an anti-ecumenical direction, and they're really not having a lot of success doing it, frankly. I know people claim that they've had any success because, what success do they have? I mean, you look at Hierotheos of Naphtakatos, his article, and he brings up how ecumenical the Moscow Patriarchate is.
And he's right. It's not like we're going to sit there and go, oh, well, no, he's an ecumenist. Well, he might be an ecumenist, but he's pointing out that Moscow is also a ecumenist. So, no.
Yeah.
You can't trust Patriarch Kirill. He was the head ecumenist for the Moscow Patriarchate for most of his, professional career.
I mean, they have the Havana Declaration where he made a joint statement with the Pope about supposedly
it caused Russians in the seminaries and in the monasteries to not stop commemorating him. So it's not like he's like this great hero of the Orthodox right now.
Yeah. And the problem is that you have some circles of people that if you try to explain this, they will immediately discount anything you say. Because their view is they've already decided that anyway.
Even Rokor has Sister Vasa, so Rokor isn't completely the anti-ecumenical and traditional church. It's made out to be within war.
They've come to have the Sister Vasa.
Let's be clear.
They always have Sister Vasa.
Sister Vasa's fairly recent. Sister Vasa basically was she was operating under the tutelage of Marker of Berlin. It's interesting, my wife, who is, she lived in the Holy Land and wanted to be a nun.
Is Sister Vasa a novice or just
We don't know. You can't find her monastery. No one knows. She's a professor. No clue.
I beg your pardon?
There's no clue. You cannot find whether A, she's under obedience to a monastery, B, what monastery she lives in, C, if she is in a monastery. What we do know is she's a professor in some German university. That's
of course. That makes sense now.
Yeah, so we don't know if she's actually, I'm sure she might be a Rossifer or something, but is she like a monastic? Does she have duties besides going on YouTube and being the Orthodox Mrs. Doubtfire? I don't think so.
Ignatius Brianchanov says Rokor isn't completely the anti-ecumenical and traditional church made out to be within World Orthodoxy, and it hasn't been for some time since this. And the problem is that once they joined the MP, one of the things they had, one of their rationales for being what it became over time was claim they didn't give that up. They joined in communion with the Moscow Patriarchate, and then suddenly they couldn't criticize the Moscow Patriarchate for all the problems in it.
No,
it was like that one what's his name? That one non-commemorator Russian Athonite monk, who basically was like completely. They were expecting after the Havana Declaration that Rokor would support all the non-commemorators.
No, Rokor totally sold out.
Exactly. They were expecting that Rokor would publicly condemn the Havana Declaration, but it did not happen. You're right. It's not the real Rokor.
Yeah, it's a shame. It's really a shame, and it's sad because there are still a lot of good people in Rokor MP, but the truth of the matter is the Rokor MP hierarchy is completely, they're like corporate sellouts. I mean, I hate to say that, but they literally will just do what the parent company tells them to.
Jabbar, the J. Brown.
The J.A. Brown, I guess.
guarantee he will be the next one. That is Hilarion Alphaeus being the next Patriarch of Moscow. That's probably true.
Yep, the head ecumenist, I guess, is a great position to audition.
And then then Elaphodorus will be the new Greek Archbishop of America for EP. Well, that's true because Elaphodorus of Prusa was the one who wrote that whole article about the Fanner having the three offices.
Oh, is the first without equals?
Yes, he's the one who wrote that. So I mean, he's the power behind the EP the Fanner at the moment. So.
Yeah, it's true.
Hilarion believes in apocatastasis. He wrote a book about it in St. Isaac the Syrian.
He's
That's
also
true.
a name worshipper. So
He defends Bolotovich and Schema Monk Hilarion.
well, I've said this before that Rochor was kind of two minds, and those two minds were invariably going to come into conflict, and they did basically after the death of Saint Philaret, and that's why we have what we have today, which is a split Rochor. So I don't want to imply that the Rochor MP does not have a connection to the old Rochor. They do, but in a very tendentious sense, in the sense that Rochor was divided.
I mean, they have they're like the rump organization that submitted.
Basically, so it's very sad, but in any case, other than that, let's see here. What time are we at now? We're at 10:23. So if we have more questions, we'll take them. And just let us know.
Father Joseph, since you work at a job in the world and such, why do you think? What do you say to people who say? I guess you run into these people on Facebook every now and again. They join apologetics groups for some weird reason. Who say that apologetics really doesn't bring people into the church. That you have to be spiritual to bring people into the church.
I'll tell.
I don't know if you've heard that. I don't know if you've heard that.
I have for years. And oh boy, this is going to get personal, but I have heard that. It was one of the things that when I first joined Orthodoxy and I first began doing apologetics, because the weird circumstances in my life made me feel I had to. A lot of people began to get angry. They would say things like, as a new convert, you should not be discussing apologetics, you should discuss it with your priest. So I discussed it with my priest, and he said, doesn't look like you're doing anything wrong. And I kept on trying to at least be obedient, but people were still mad, because they were like, you can't intellectually defend orthodoxy. You can't defend orthodoxy, you can't say things. It was like you had to be over mystical with no real meaning to your thinking. And I internalized this to some degree, because even when I was doing apologetics, as a layman, so on and so forth, there was always that nagging doubt, like, are you displeasing God because you're doing this apologetics thing? And I will also say that, we had a convert family when I had a mission, and we may restart that mission, I don't know, God willing. But the point is, when he asked for help defending the faith, I internalized those doubts, and I said, no, it's not necessary. You need to be more spiritual. I was parroting the stuff I had heard for years. And that guy left and became a papist. And so when I gave up on a lot of stuff. I gave up on, mission work, etc. And it wasn't until somebody found a debate that I had and said, can you help us in this discussion? And then I realized that, there are people who want to defend orthodoxy, and they need to be organized, and they need to work together. Because the truth is, in the history of the church, there have always been apologists, and they were not professional apologists, and they didn't declare themselves apologists, they just did their job. They just defended the faith using the Holy Fathers. Now when I hear people say that, I laugh at them. And I tell people, young people, I say, don't listen to them. Because the truth is, you aren't going to get more St. Mark of Ephesus. You're not going to get more St. Photios. You're not going to get more even Overbecks if you just say, no, you don't need to defend the faith using your brain. You just need to be mystical and stuff. It's garbage. It's absolute garbage. And anyone who says that, just tell them to be quiet, or just mute them, because they're not defending the church. And since we've gone into the business of defending the church, we see more people who want to join it. Because, you know what? People have brains. And you're not supposed to shut them off. I remember when I was, still, investigating Orthodoxy, and I met a Belarusian priest who said, "Leave your great theological mind at the door." Well, that's a sin. God gave you a mind. Use it. That's my point. So let's see here what we got here. Ignatius writes, so weird point for Deacon and Hieromonk Enoch. I recently finished reading all the Nag Hammadi library writings and saw around 5 references to toll houses, but these are not the same as our Eastern Orthodox belief in them. So the Lazar Puhalo slander on them is ridiculous and shouldn't be taken seriously, and there are Jewish writings from before Christ's earthly, particularly one Enoch, the Testament of Abraham, the Apocalypse of Zephaniah, birth that mention the toll houses, say they are part of a faith and aren't a Gnostic innovation brought in by Bogomils or whatnot. I guess we'll...
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, we agree. Anyway, yeah, I heard a papist not on the radio talk about how women...
Does anybody take Pahalo seriously?
A lot of people. Don't kid yourself, Father. A lot of people, because there's this anti-thought crowd that's, over mystical, and they take...
He's part of the anti-thought crowd. Yes. Anti-apologetics crowd.
He is. And I think all of the, when you get, like...
That's why when people question him, he's like, you're not allowed to question. This is the
exactly.
mystical.
And that's ridiculous. You should question. And don't be afraid to question. And if your priest tells you don't question, say why.
Because a lot of those people almost feel like they're setting up their own little... I mean, Pahalo criticizes people for setting up their own elder cult, but he kind of does the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So... Okay.
He does.
Yep.
But what we're setting up is something different. We're setting up Orthodox who know how to think, and we want you guys to think openly. And when you think openly, use the Holy Fathers as your reference.
Also, Sean says, I run into Pahalo supporters occasionally. Sorry, I mean, I run into gays occasionally.
Ugh, faggotry. We had to say it at least once, but just once.
Well, there's a crossover. See, Pahalo gradually went more and more insane over the decades. Either that or he was hiding all this, and he gradually waited till he had some establishment.
I heard some weird stuff about him when he visited HTM that, there was some stuff. And this was years before he was talking about transgenders. This was like a decade and a half beforehand. So, yeah, it's all coming out now. A lot of the OCA clergy are Pahalo supporters regarding the Telonia. Well, that's their fault. In any case, tell them to listen to our show and to, gladly respond to these claims. So, yeah, we have no problem with answering them. That's one of the things that you have to remember. When you use the Holy Fathers, and you read them, you study them, so on and so forth, you don't have to be afraid of anyone saying, "Oh, I've got something for you." If it's not from the Holy Fathers, it's going to just be thrown away. We're
Well, what they say is that you can't rely on the lives of the saints because they're basically legends, so they throw those out.
Wow. Yeah, true.
I get
it.
That you cannot rely on, all the liturgical texts because they may have interpolation. They not interpolations. They may have Gnostic influence in them. It's like the same people who say that monasticism was invented as a compromise with Gnosticism to keep people from completely leaving the church or something like that. So.
Well.
Okay, I think we've come to 10:30
mark, so we've completed a show. So thank you everyone on Discord, especially Timer for all your hard work. Actually, I think he might have left. No, he's still there. In any case, have a great night. I'm going to shut off the record button, and we're getting this is a new way to do it. So, Father, benedicite.
Benedicite.